And here we are with episode 80.
We've been doing this for 80 episodes now.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's a milestone along with 50, more important than 70 somehow, even 75. 80 seems good.
Exactly. Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been kind of interested in the idea of octals. So the idea of eight is pretty. Uh, how do you say it? It's kind of a good kind of milestone number. It's nice and
Yeah,
round. So
quite
80
right.
is something that's really nice and even. I myself prefer it over 50.
Yes, yes. And as it seems even though it's only a few more, it seems more important, much more important than 75 for some reason. So
Yeah.
75 passed with nary a mention, I think. Yes.
hmm
So there we go. So we've got a few things tonight. At least I've got a few things that I was going to mention. Actually, normally we discuss it beforehand, but I hadn't actually asked you beforehand if you had anything on for today's episode.
Oh yeah, we're going pretty cold for the most part, very last minute, and yeah, thanks again, Rob, for that.
It just occurred to me that I didn't actually ask before, but anyway, that's all right. First of all, just update on AVFM and Voice for Men. So the publishing had been a bit slow for a while. I'd been busy with stuff behind the scenes, as I mentioned last time. It's picked up a bit now, and I'm going to try to at least aim to publish at least a couple a week. Um, the other thing is that there's probably going to be in the future more emphasis on some of the static pages that are on the. I have added quite a lot of static pages since I took over, but I think there'll be even more on that in the future. And along those lines, the wanted section has expanded and is going to continue to expand. So these are women who are wanted in some jurisdiction for serious offences. In some cases, in some cases it's criminal offences. In some cases, it's international parental child abduction. So, but by all means, have a look under the wanted section on A Voice for Men, and you will be seeing more women being added there. So,
Yes,
but as I said, there will be a lot more static pages as well being added to the
right.
site.
Yes,
So,
and I may have an article coming up myself too. It's I know it's been a while, but it's life's been busy. Just want to be sure I can find the time to see. Once I get around to it, I get it done in short order. But it's just really getting it initiated. It's the problem.
it really can be like that. Exactly. That's right. And I've got a few ideas. I've got a few half-written articles there. Same deal. Anyway, yes, we'll get those moving. And so now that a lot of that back end stuff's kind of a bit more sorted out,
Mhm.
I'll have more time. So,
Yeah.
next one I've got is Great Men of History. So it occurred to me that I hadn't ever added Leonardo da Vinci for a
Mhm.
great bit of history. In fact, I was even when it occurred to me today, I actually went and checked the list because I thought I must have added it, but no, apparently not. I do have him on the STEM 365 list, but not the Great Men of History. So
Okay.
got Leonardo da Vinci for Great Men of History, and but I've also got a man of note, and that is Charles Martel. He there'll be history buffs will know who he is, but we'll get to him. But he doesn't even though I'm a bit of a fan of Charles Martel actually. He doesn't quite qualify as a great man of history, so I added him as a man of note. So anyway, on to
Sure.
Leonardo da Vinci.
Sure.
Born on the 15th of April 1452. It's actually kind of interesting that we do have definitive information on his birthday. Not everybody, was born that far back we can definitively say, but apparently that is the case with Da Vinci. And he was born in the town of, not surprisingly, Vinci, which is near Florence. Of course, most surnames, were fluid at the time, and a lot of they weren't really surnames. A lot of titles were based on where you were from and so forth. Then later on evolved into surnames. So anyway, so we're actually around about this time. So what this is, mid 15th century. That I think most European countries sort of started to evolve surnames more like permanent surnames, more like in the 16th century. But there were much earlier examples actually. But most people I think started to get surnames somewhere around about the 16th century in Europe. Anyway, he was actually the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant woman, which I had never realised. So in the sort of the era in which he lived, that kind of put him behind the eight ball a little bit, actually. So Anyway, he was given a formal education where he obviously I think his intelligence and his talent obviously showed through. So yeah, he was they saw that he had artistic talent and of course obviously a strong intellect. He was apprenticed around 1469, which makes him 17 years old. I would have thought that was fairly late for an apprenticeship in Europe at the time, but
Mm,
apparently in Italy, some sources say not so much. That it wasn't that unusual. Maybe a little bit on the late side, but not sort of outlandishly so. So anyway, but he learned quite a lot of things in his apprenticeship, which do speak to kind of the work that he carried on later on, including painting, sculpture, engineering, metalwork, and mechanics. So we do kind of think of Leonardo da Vinci as someone who kind of just appeared out of nowhere, a bit like an Einstein figure, and
yeah.
he's all on his own, and nobody else in the era was like him. But like Einstein, that's actually not true. Einstein's work was built on the work of others, and so was Leonardo da Vinci. So even that's not taking away from either of them, but
Yes.
they still built on the work of others. So he ended up becoming an independent master in the Guild of St. Luke in 1472. Now he is among his better known paintings, The Last Supper, 1495 to 1498, and of course the Mona Lisa, which it was odd that I had actually forgotten that he had painted the Mona Lisa. Anyway, because when I think of Leonardo da
Really?
Vinci, I think yeah, when I think of Leonardo da Vinci, I think of his sculptures and the engineering work and everything. I had actually forgotten that he actually painted the Mona Lisa. So there you go. Yeah. So
Right.
I
Well, I
was
think
reminded of
I
this.
I would think that's one of the more well-known aspects of the
Hmm.
Da Vinci and the public. Sure.
It probably shows my bias that I was really focused on his engineering work. The fact that the sculptures or the designs for the gliders and stuff. That's the stuff that
Mm.
I think of when I think of Da Vinci. So um, anyway, so
Though I
yeah,
did, though I did
he
take it
gone.
for granted that he did the Last Supper. So,
Yes, yes, right.
yeah.
So he filled thousands of notebook pages, studies of anatomy, flight, hydraulics, geology, mathematics, and engineering. And engaged in dissection of the human body, which for a long time was actually something that was illegal. So
Mm.
I'm not sure if it was in his time and place. I didn't actually check, but for a long time in Europe, that was something that was actually considered inappropriate for religious reasons. So um, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so a lot of people remember him for his artistic pursuits. I remember him for his, designs of helicopters and
Yeah.
gliders. But in actual fact, during his lifetime, and I did know this before, actually, I'd done this, I read this a few years ago when I was looking into him. Uh, he was during his own lifetime, he principally focused on military technology because that's what paid the bills. So yeah, that's what his employers wanted him there for. And they allowed him to engage in other pursuits, but they actually wanted him to turn out military equipment. And he did turn out some effective military equipment, although quite a few of his designs were beyond the sort of the material science of the time. So they were good ideas, and sometimes they were built later, but in his era it wasn't practical. Some of the military technology he developed included an early armored vehicle, a giant crossbow, which it's just 80 to 90 feet across. And when I thought of this, I actually thought of Game of Thrones because there's a giant crossbow in Game of Thrones, and I realise now that they've just ripped it off, with Da Vinci. So uh, he did several designs for multi-barrel cannons, trying to sort of increase the rate of fire, and a chariot with blades on the wheels, which of course is another one that's it's sort of almost a staple. I think there was an example of that in a
Ben-Hur?
movie. Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur?
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
It was Ben-Hur. Yes, I was about to say a movie with Charlton Heston, but yes, it was Ben-Hur. So I think they're ripping off Da Vinci there, possibly. So anyway, there you go. But yeah, he also developed many defensive technologies I believe were used, like various shapes of defensive fortifications that could withstand cannon shot and so forth. Um, so yes, as I was saying, in his era, many of his inventions unfortunately weren't practical, but in
Well,
some cases later on they were developed.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he spent afterwards in his later life. He was able to sort of, I think, stop designing military technology, and he was able to focus a little bit more on the artistic work and so forth. And he spent the last few years of his life between Florence, Milan, and Rome. Although he later moved to France, where he died. So he is a true polymath, and as Vernon
Yes, I
knows
was about,
from
yeah,
exactly. He is a
yeah,
true polymath. I am very reluctant to label people today as a polymath because I think it's the advanced nature of many fields makes it very hard to become a true master in more than one. Not completely ruling it out, but I think it's very hard. Would be very hard to be a polymath today. So, but in his era, this was something that a very intelligent and educated person could do, and he did.
right.
So, Leonardo da Vinci, I'm amazed it's taken 80 episodes for me to get to him, although we haven't been doing great men of history for that entire time. So,
Exactly, and it's good to have a good name like that in our 80th. Sure.
exactly, and I've got him in the STEM 365, which, for those who don't know, is a project on Wiki for Men to eventually come up with a man who contributed to STEM with a birthday for each day of the year. I mean, technically, I'll add February 29, possibly, so maybe I should call it STEM 366.
Sure.
Uh, but this came about because I noticed that feminist groups often like to talk about. They'll bring up women in science.
Hmm.
Some people like Marie Curie, their reputation is actually has stomped all over people like their husband Pierre, who also contributed to the work. But I noticed a tendency for the same sort of women to keep turning up on the lists. So, might have a list of 10 and maybe there'll be an overlap of 8 with another list of 10 and so forth. And I thought, well, there are so many men who have made these amazing contributions that I think I should be able to come up with one for every day of the year. So I
Exactly.
decided on being consistent with the birthday. Uh, Obviously, in some cases, we don't really know their birthday, as I was saying for Leonardo da Vinci before, and so in some cases it's an estimate. But that's the STEM 365 list, and it's progressing. I'm just doing it periodically. It'll probably take me several more years to complete the list, but when time allows, or when I come up with a new man, a new great man of history that isn't on the list that's relevant, they go in. So anyway, next is Charles Martel. So.
Sure.
Vernon, do you know who Charles Martel is?
The name is familiar. I did a
Good.
quick look of him, but he was not ringing a bell. But the name is so familiar. It's
Yep.
like like somebody I should know.
Yep, no problem at all. Cool. So, okay, so he's Charlemagne's grandfather. And yeah, so Charlemagne was, of course, the establisher of the Carolingian Empire. I'll say, I mean, it developed over time, but I'll say he was really the one who established, I think, as an empire. Charlemagne was a great figure and may end up being a man of note or even a great man of history, possibly in some future
Possibly.
episode.
Sure.
Charlemagne's father was Pepin the Short, which I just love that as a name. That's great. Pepin the Short. So Pepin the Short, Charlemagne's father and Charles Martel's son, was actually the first emperor of the Carolingian dynasty. Um, Actually, I think they gave him a different name. But anyway, he was the first. I'll get to why that's the case. He essentially established himself as king of the Franks, basically. I'll get to why that's the case in a minute. So you've got Charlemagne. His father is Pepin the Short. I just wanted to say that name again because I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, and then of course Charles Martel is Pepin the Short's father. Now Martel actually means hammer. And that probably gives you some idea of what the guy was like, right? So he's not screwing around. Yeah, he's probably a fairly tough figure. So, but he's actually really interesting. So he was not ever king of the Franks. Oh, and even Charlemagne was established as an emperor by the Pope, so that's why he got to be called. And it's
Mhm.
an empire. But um, Charles Martel was actually had the title Mayor of the Palace, which seems like a bit of a strange title to have. Technically, there was a there was a royal family in the Frankish kingdom called the Merovingian dynasty, and they had ruled the Frankish kingdom for some time. and they were technically the leaders, but in practice, over several generations, they had lost power, kind of like the way the Japanese emperor did actually, and became
Mhm.
essentially a figurehead. Same sort of thing.
Right.
I think it was the shogun who took over. Same sort of thing happened with the mayor of the palace. Even though Charles Martel was not the king, he was the power behind the throne, and the Merovingians had no power, no practical power, which is why Charles Martel was happy to leave them on the throne while he ran things. His son, Pepin the Short, just decided to dispense with them and took over as king himself. And then his son, Charlemagne, became an emperor. But so the three of them were very, very important figures in Western Europe and the development of France and Germany, actually, both countries. Anyway, so Charles Martel, after the death of his father, actually fought a succession with other sort of claimants for the throne for control of the not throne for control of the Frankish state. But he became by 718, so we're talking 8th century AD here. He
Mhm.
had defeated his enemy, become a dominant political military leader of the Frankish realms. Frankish realms. So anyway, he built up Frankish military power. Again, he was the one really running the show, and he fought a series of wars and advanced the power of the Frankish state. But he fought wars against the Frisians, Saxons, Bavarians, and others. But one battle that was very, very important was the Battle of Tours. Now, I believe some recent historians have tried to claim the Battle of Tours is not as important as historians have maintained for several hundred years. There's a bit of a tendency with modern historians to do this, to claim that, oh, yes, that actually wasn't that important after all. So I think they're trying to, I honestly think maybe some cases there may be some validity to what they're saying, but in a lot of cases, I actually think they're kind of just trying to make a name for themselves and come up with something new. Personally, I think the Battle of Tours was very, very important because what actually happened was, and this speaks to the Crusades and it speaks to woke in history
Mhm.
and in the teaching of history. A lot of historians, for at least for the last few decades, have been very happy to portray to talk about the Crusades, for example, and to portray the late Middle Ages as being the evil Europeans making war on the peaceful people in the Middle East, and establishing
Yeah.
the Crusader kingdoms and so forth. And right, it was very much, and I think this is actually disrespectful to the Middle Easterners, in all honesty, because it was very much a clash of equals. But you had a Christian society in Europe, a Muslim society in the Middle East, and they were slogging it out against it. Not always. There was peace and there was a lot of trade, but from
Mhm.
time to time it would flare up, and one side or the other would try to get to best the other side, and it was very much a conflict of equals, and they gave as good as they got in many cases.
Yeah.
So while you have the Europeans establishing the Crusader kingdoms for up to a couple of hundred years, depending on which Crusader kingdom you're talking about, you had the Muslims, in conquering Iberia, for example, and occupying
Yeah.
it for several hundred years. You had them conquering Sicily, Malta as well. Obviously, that's almost a given, and coming very close to threatening the Italian mainland. So the Muslim kingdoms and the Christian kingdoms were really going at it off and on over hundreds of years, and it wasn't just one side beating up on the other. It was very much a clash of equals. Anyway, getting back to tours. So the Muslim army marching out of Iberia and into France was doing very, very well. And it was looking, for a while, it was looking like the Frankish kingdom might actually fall to an Islamic army. And if that had happened, that would have changed world history completely. I mean, you would never have seen the development of Western Europe in the way that it did. It's unlikely that the UK could have operated, I think, and been as successful as it had in a world where it had potentially a hostile Islamic country right on its
Mhm.
border. So I think world history would likely have been completely different. Anyway, so Charles Martel managed to defeat a Muslim army at Tours and halted the advance. And of course, eventually, Christian kingdoms in Iberia conquered the Muslim kingdoms, kicked them right out of,
Mhm.
of Iberia, which for those who don't know is where Spain and Portugal are. And of course, and I always love this. The year, getting off Charles a little bit, but the year that the last Muslim ruler was expelled from Iberia was 1492, the
Mm.
same year that Christopher Columbus landed in the the Caribbean, and without and you know and thought he'd landed in India.
Mm.
Yeah, no credit to Christopher Columbus there. I think he was a bit of a twit, but nevertheless, I always find it really interesting that two major events in Spanish history essentially happened in the same year, which is absolutely extraordinary, because it was after that that Spain and Portugal they could really start to advance, and then you see Spain and both countries, but Spain in particular, being very powerful empires in the centuries after that. But yeah, all in one anyway. So
Mm.
Charles Martel. It all went back to the Battle of Tours. If he hadn't done that, then Islam would likely have controlled France as well as Spain, and who knows how far it would have gone. It could have gone to the British Isles. Certainly could have gone into Germany, and world history would have been very, very different.
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So
One,
yes,
yeah. So one
go
note
on.
I've got about how you delineate between the great man of history and the men of note. The men of note always have this kind of decisive action that they once did that affected the course of history, uh, compared to the great man of history, which is kind of more of a broad uh, we have a focus on like some several achievements they have, and they've brought themselves up as great. But yeah, and once again, the man of note is somebody who affected the course of history. So
Yeah, I think so. That's right.
yeah,
Because to be a great man of history, it has to be more holistic. It's not just one thing you did. They lived a great life. And that doesn't
right,
mean
yeah,
they didn't make mistakes in some cases, but they lived a great life. Whereas more often than not, someone like Charles Martel, much as I do, I like the character of Charles Martel. I think the Battle of Tours was his greatest moment. And he also was. He did some other things that I think would also invalidate him being a great man of history, like stealing, resources from the church to fund his wars and this sort of thing.
yeah,
That's
hmm,
perhaps not quite appropriate. So yeah, I think he fell short. But you're right. More often than not, I think because they don't make that standard for the great men of history, it more often than not comes down to one important thing that they did. Yeah, I think
exactly,
so.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you allow me, circling right back to the STEM 365. Another
Mm.
motivator to kind of do this, it seems to me, is that since the feminists are always coming up with the women who did all this and stuff like that, but in this episode we just talked about how any given great man of history, STEM or otherwise, derived from the work that came before it. So they're always building up upon it, and they're not just coming in one fell swoop and attaining greatness. They're always kind of working with what they've inherited, uh, and as such, perhaps we consider this, but not much consideration when the feminists talk about any of the given women. It's almost like they're kind of like automatic geniuses. Even in the case of the Charles Babbage's engine, uh, this it seems kind of downplayed. No, the
Yeah.
original material.
I think that's absolutely true, and it's funny because they often claim that women scientists have their work downplayed, and the honor is they often claim is stolen by men, and that I don't discount that happens, right? But I think it more often than not happens in the context of junior scientists having their credits having the credit taken by senior scientists. And having worked with scientists in the past, it was explained to me that that's actually pretty much how it's designed to work. So the these days they'll talk about a principal investigator. That's the name given to a researcher who's doing scientific
Yeah.
work, and they have many minions, if you like, who are scientists who are doing either graduated with a PhD or are still doing their PhD or whatever it happens to be. They're the ones doing the work, and the principal investigator is to a large degree the one that takes the credit, right?
Hmm.
But then the wheel turns and the juniors come up later and they do the same thing to the next generation. And this is, as it was explained to me, is pretty much how it's designed to work.
Right.
So they'll point to women who had the credit, junior women who had the credit taken by senior men. I'm not disputing that that occurred. I'm just disputing that it was based on their gender.
Hmm. Oh
Because
yeah,
men in the
exactly.
same situation would have had the same thing happen to them. And as I said, that's actually had the claim put to me that that's actually how it's meant to work. Yeah, a
Right.
couple of examples that I often think of. So Marie Curie, who I mentioned before. So we have talked about this before. Her husband Pierre was quite a bit older, about 20 years older, and he was already an established scientist. He died because he was hit by a car in probably amongst the first cars in
Mm.
Paris, so he didn't end up. She continued to work on after that, and he would have contributed more had he lived. But there's another gentleman by the name of Henri Becquerel, and he also died. And he had worked with them. He worked separately, but he collaborated and they exchanged ideas. They were all working in the field of radiation, all in Paris, and they shared one of the Nobel prizes actually. So anyway, she's remembered today, but Henri Becquerel and Pierre Curie are often forgotten. And another one, of course, is Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr invented Wi-Fi. I just love that. That is the greatest thing ever. Lamarr invented Wi-Fi. I saw it again recently. Hedy Lamarr
Hmm.
did not invent Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi was in fact developed by hundreds of people at least
Hmm.
over the overwhelming majority of whom were men, by the way, over a wide variety of technologies over a number of decades. What Hedy Lamarr did do, and we've covered this in another episode, but it doesn't hurt to mention it again. She and you ready for this? A man by the name of George Antill
Hmm.
jointly developed what's called a frequency hopping technology. So the problem they had, though this was during World War II, and I know we have covered this before, but again, I think it doesn't hurt to explain the truth again. The US had a problem that their torpedoes, their radio guided torpedoes, were being jammed, and Hedy Lamarr and George Antill came up with a solution, which was to use frequency hopping technology, where effectively the frequency would periodically change. I think the idea in their case was that both sides would know ahead of time what the change would be, and so that they would, as long as you kept them in sync, they would be able, the operator would be able to keep control of the torpedo, even though the frequency was changing. It was a good idea. It wasn't actually used by the United States Navy. Maybe they felt it was difficult to implement, or possibly the radio jamming wasn't actually that big of a problem for them. But anyway, for whatever reason, they didn't actually implement the technology. Interestingly enough, they had 80. Now George Antill was a pianist, and of course Hedy Lamarr was an actress, and I think she's a singer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, they actually had. I think this is quite fun. They had 88 frequencies, which just happens to be the number of keys on a piano.
Yes.
So apparently they did actually use a piano as sort of inspiration for this idea.
Hmm.
Anyway, a similar frequency hopping technology, not the one developed by Hedy Lamarr and George Antill, that was never implemented, unfortunately for them. And they patented it, by the way. But a similar idea was incorporated into Wi-Fi decades later, and that's the source of the confusion. So you've got Hedy Lamarr and George Antill developed frequency hopping technology. George gets forgotten. Then somebody confuses it with the frequency hopping technology in Wi Fi, which still doesn't mean she created Wi Fi, and then makes the leap to say that she invented Wi Fi. So it's wrong on several counts.
Yeah.
Anyway, not to downplay what they did. What they did was innovative. Apparently not the first. Also, apparently it wasn't actually the very first frequency hopping technology developed, but I believe there was some innovation in there, and it
Mm.
did deserve a patent at the time. So anyway, but yeah, poor old getting back to looping back to men being having
Contributions.
their yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah. George was forgotten in this whole
Mhm.
equation. Yeah,
Exactly. And who knows how many men we don't know that have been kind of given this treatment, but the women get the spotlight because they were the odd woman in the group,
yeah,
and they just love to focus on these women, kind of the epitome of
and
gynocentrism, really.
yeah, exactly. And if anything, this while this problem would have existed before. It's become magnified in recent decades.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so Hedy Lamarr did not invent Wi-Fi. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
it's wrong on several counts. Anyway,
Right.
but yeah, looping back to Charles Martel, as I said again, yes, a bit of a personal favourite of mine. I think the Battle of Tours was very, very important, despite what some modern historians may say. And I think if he hadn't been there to do that, who knows what would have happened? That speaks to the great. Actually, there is a great man of history theory as well, not to be confused with great men of history that we're using it, but the great man of history theory or hypothesis says that there were individuals, mostly men, who were at particular points in history who acted in a particular way to carry history forward. The alternative theory suggests that individuals aren't very important in historical forces, and if, say, Charles Martel hadn't inherited the throne, somebody else would have done that job. So I tend to think that I mean, we don't really know, but I tend to think that these individuals are probably pretty important.
Yeah,
The
I
classic,
agree.
yeah, yeah, the classic example is actually Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was almost a lone voice about at one point about, in regards to staying in World War II and fighting the Nazis. Had Winston Churchill been Winston Churchill, speaking of people being hit by cars, Winston Churchill was actually hit by a taxi cab in New York City in 1935. Had he died, it's one of the great what ifs. What if the taxi cab had killed him in 1935?
Right.
What would have happened? Would the UK have stayed in World War II, for example? So we don't know, obviously,
Exactly.
but
Well,
I tend to think, yeah, I tend to think that there doesn't seem to be anybody else willing to stand up within that case. Anyway, sorry, go on.
yeah. No, no, no. No, it's good. So, I tend to agree with you that the individuals kind of make their initiative and move history
Mm,
forward. Sorry, due to their own qualities and everything. But I take particular issue with the alternative, whatever that theory is called,
mm,
because it assumes that history is always going to go a certain way with any
mm,
given person filling that role at that exact same time, which, you know,
yeah.
individuals fill roles and make initiatives uh, due to a need for it at the time, and it's really going to depend on their constitution to actually make that initiation, you know, and move it along forward and make the achievements that they do. And it's going to be different in any given scenario, in any given alternate timeline in which this didn't
Mm,
happen and this other guy took over, is going to kind of look in a somewhat different way.
yeah.
So the individual is important, and I object to the idea that, excuse me, that it isn't, because it essentially says that uh, people are just carbon copies of each other, and
Mm.
we are a collective. We think with a collective brain, and we're just herd animals. That's kind of the adjacent set of ideas that tyrants love to use, whether it's in their government office or in academia.
Yeah, it's true. There is a tendency in autocratic societies to downplay individualism, actually. Yeah, and in communism more generally, actually. Yeah, I mean that's right. If you look at a lot of the these figures, like Adolf Hitler's another one. I mean, Adolf Hitler was there were a number of things about him that were a bit unusual, right? So he hadn't
Yeah.
been there. I mean, in the case of Adolf Hitler, for example, he so he was an Austrian as
Mhm.
he was his father was a political was a government worker in the Austro-Hungarian Empire prior to World War One, and so they were in the new state of Austria. Adolf Hitler didn't think much of Austria, and he loved the German Empire. So when World War One broke out, he should have been drafted into the Austrian army. Instead, he applied to the German Empire. The army was actually broken up into sort of many different military forces based on the various nobles that were in the German Empire, and he applied to Bavaria, the Bavarian army, and apparently it was a clerical error that got him accepted because they should have caught the fact he was an Austrian citizen and rejected him. And apparently they didn't. and as a
Mhm.
result, he was drafted into the Bavarian, not drafted, he was accepted into the Bavarian army, fought in World War One, I think, did he get the Iron Cross? He did very well. Despite his many other flaws and negative characteristics, he was not a coward. He actually was a brave fighter in World War One. Anyway, that really set him on the road to being the dictator of Germany because had he been an Austrian veteran instead of a German veteran, I just don't see how he could have risen in power in the Nazi Party.
Mhm.
So that clerical error, put him on that route, right? So, but if the clerical error had been picked up, for example, and in fact, what they were apparently supposed to do was have arrested him and sent him to the Austrian army to be drafted, and they didn't. So had that occurred, that comes up, would somebody else have been in that role? Well, I don't know if there was anybody else around who was quite like Adolf Hitler actually at that time. There were other Nazi leaders, but they weren't like him. Like Ernst Röhm, for example, was a very different figure, and he would have taken the Nazis or the National Socialists in a very different way, I think. So I think we would have ended up with a very, yeah, as you said, I don't think there was anybody else who was going to step into that role. If he had not been able to, similar with Churchill, yeah, I just don't see anybody else. I mean, if anyone wants to suggest somebody who might have been an alternative Churchill, I'd be interested to know because I don't know anybody in the British government at that time that was
Mhm.
really who would have been willing to be like that. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, Winston Churchill was an arsehole, and sometimes you need an arsehole. So,
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I understand.
yeah, yeah. So. Yeah, it's getting back to Charles Martel. Yeah, would somebody else have done what he did? I don't know if they would have. Yeah. So anyway,
Right.
excuse me. That's actually all I have, except for Zoe McClellan, of course.
Right. Well,
I don't know if you have anything
quite
else.
I'm quite all right to make this a marginally short one. We'll probably gather some more notes next time, and I've had a rough week, so I didn't really get a chance to work on much more. I mean, I did. So, like I said before, though, I do have a pending article. If it meets the acceptance criteria of AVFM, I think it'll be good for publishing soon. And I also got another video that I've scripted that I'll put on my channel. Uh, uh, Hopefully very soon. I meant to
Good.
put it out on July, but again, rough week. So,
And I want to talk about Florence Nightingale on a future. I said this, I think, last time. I
mhm,
hadn't got around to doing the research. I've done some research on Florence Nightingale, but I haven't reached the point at which I'm comfortable with the level of research I've done. And I
mhm,
want to do a bit more to sort of, cross the T's and dot the I's and all that. So
exactly.
uh, let's just say that she's a little bit of a different figure than what history is generally remembers her as. But I think
Mhm.
it's something to talk about in a future episode. And I think I'll probably do an article as well.
Yeah, sure. Well,
So.
these women that we're kind of exposing here that either they don't deserve the full credit and get given scientific uh, outing, or someone like Florence Nightingale. I even have some controversial ideas of my own, but we won't get
Mm,
into that right now.
that'll be
But
interesting to, yeah.
yeah, yeah, but I think these are kind of worth doing in like punctuated video series, I think, on somebody's channel, kind of like like myth busting this or that about certain women and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. And there is quite a bit of that. And the reason I do this is because of the women are wonderful effect. Because
Mhm.
women are human, and in fact, I think that it's actually dehumanizing to women to view them as these sort of saintly figures. Women are
Mhm.
human, and they have the same foibles as men. This is the reason that I often talk about this sort of thing because I know, I personally even know women who tend to view women as morally superior to men and generally not having the same flaws. And I think it's dehumanizing. I really do.
Mhm.
Humans
Right.
are flawed creatures. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they do this in the guise of admiration and exaltation,
Mm,
especially in the case with someone like Auguste Comte, for instance, who really wanted to push this gynocentrism during his
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
so
fact, that's right. There is actually a really long history in Europe in Christianity of this sort of in the medieval Christian Europe. It was fairly common to view women as morally superior to men.
mhm.
So yeah, this is not a new thing. It's something that's been going on, as you said, for quite a while. So
Exactly. Yeah.
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 Thank you very much. I think that's. Oh no, I haven't
Yeah.
talked
Yeah.
about Zoe yet.
Yeah. It's
So
okay. I was about to catch you anyway. So
thank you very much. Cool,
yeah.
excellent, good. As of August 2026, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan is a public figure who has appeared in numerous popular television shows, including Star Trek Voyager, JAG, NCIS New Orleans, and Designated Survivor. Her face is familiar to millions. It is extraordinary that she has evaded detection for so long. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Thank you very much.
All right. Catch you in episode 81.
See you then. Bye.